My name's Joe Jarvis. I'm from Hopedale, Massachusetts, where I try to elect the good guys, and I blog at blog.vigilantvote.com. Today I'm going to be talking about moving from libertarianism to anarcho-capitalism, because a lot of libertarians believe in the non-initiation of force principle, and to really bring that principle to its logical conclusion, you have to get rid of all force, which would include the government as well. So I'll just be discussing how to move peacefully from where we are now to an anarcho-capitalist society. My second year at PorcFest, and I think I'm a lifer.
Is this anybody's first time at PorcFest? All right, yeah, PorcFest. And do we have any libertarians in the crowd? Just, okay, I wasn't sure if I was in the right place. My name is Joe Jarvis. My name's written on this poster in big letters. I have a blog called Vigilant Vote, blog.vigilantvote.com. I come from Massachusetts. Which is pretty terrible. Boo is appropriate. Okay, Connecticut's not that much better. But I try to get the good guys elected down there. I work for a state rep who's trying to get elected state senator, very libertarian-minded kind of guy. So this is my second year at PorcFest, and I love it. And last year, when I came to PorcFest, I learned a little bit about anarcho-capitalism, which I really wasn't acquainted with before. I got into the idea of anarcho-capitalism, looked into it a lot, and I wanted to spread my idea of the benefits of anarcho-capitalism versus libertarianism, which are very related, but just slightly different. I hope nobody minds that I decided to go low-tech. I just did a poster. And this isn't going to make much sense until I get going with it, but you know, my poster making skills haven't been practiced in about 7 years, so I hope you don't mind the low-tech aspect of it. So I'm not the ultimate authority on anarcho-capitalism. You know, this is billed as an introduction sort of thing. I just want to spread the word, basically. All right. So who wants the government to control their lives? Nobody? Okay. I don't either. And really, that's what libertarianism is all about. We want the smallest government possible. What you might say, and again, I don't know why I made this so small. I knew how big this room was. But government, according to a lot of libertarians, is a necessary evil in order to make the trains run on time. That whole thing sort of related to Mussolini, and he was such an effective leader that he got the trains to run on time. But I think the negatives outweighed the benefits in terms of that. So that's the thing. With libertarianism, it doesn't quite go far enough. Government is the monopolization of force. It's pretty much they monopolize initiating force in a particular geographical area. I don't know if you can see the Monopoly guy with a couple of Uzis up here. That's the monopoly on force. So what that means is that the government is going to say, you have to pay your taxes, and if you don't pay your taxes, we're going to come to your house eventually, take you away with guns, and put you in jail. That's force. I can't go to my neighbor's house and do the same thing and say, well, you have to pay me protection money, or I'll put you in jail. That's what they call the mafia. So really, there's not much difference between the mafia and the government when you think of it from that perspective. So not to offend anybody, but libertarianism sometimes it requires a little bit of doublethink. Anybody familiar with 1984? Big Brother? So doublethink is the process of holding two contradictory ideas simultaneously. Two ideas that cannot coexist and be true, and holding those simultaneously. One would be the initiation of force is immoral, and the other one would be that we need a little bit of government. But if the initiation of force is immoral, then that government would be immoral as well. You can't believe that we need government and that initiation of force is bad at the same time, or that's pretty much doublethink. So what you should really think of it as, think of the government as an umpire. It's umpire down here. What happens if the umpire makes terrible calls? Probably he'll get fired. So if our government makes terrible calls as that umpire, we don't have the ability to fire him. Our government's pretty much coming in here and saying, I'm going to make a bad call. I might even be working for one of these teams. I might be working for a player, but you can't fire me. That's what that's what the monopoly on force is about. We need to be able to fire the umpire when he makes bad calls. And if you can fire the umpire, they don't have that monopoly on force. They're not a government anymore. Now, we're still going to want things that resemble the government the way it is right now. What do you guys want the government to do? What do you think is necessary for the government to do? Okay, I'm done then. We're good. Yeah, that's pretty much the point. But a lot of people think that we need the government to have a military, to have police, education. There's a lot of different things that people think. Courts, right. So that is, the point is that there's a market for these things. We want them. We would still want justice. We would still want courts. We don't want to be victimized. We don't want to have to be able to protect ourselves completely. We want somebody else to be able to protect us on our behalf. So pretty much anything that there's a market for will be taken care of in an anarcho-capitalist society. I want police. Police will spring up. But the best thing is I can fire them. The police are going to be competing. And if they don't do a good job, I'm not going to keep going to them. And if that cop beats somebody on the side of a road, he's not going to be a police officer for very long because he doesn't work for the government, which has that monopolization on force. He works for an agency which doesn't want their cops running around beating people. So pretty much the market is going to keep the government honest. It won't be a government because they won't have that monopoly on force. Down here at the bottom of the poster is a couple South Park characters. I don't know if anybody watches South Park here. So there's an episode of South Park. It's season 9, episode 2, actually, if anybody wants to look it up. And hippies start to take over. I don't want to offend any hippies either, but hippies start to take over the town of South Park. And the boys, Stan and Kyle, kind of hang with the hippies and figure out what they're all about. And it turns out that the hippies are pretty much saying that corporations are the ultimate source of evil in the world. So it starts with Stan. So it seems like we have enough people now. When do we start taking down the corporations? Hippie. Yeah, man, the corporations. Right now they're raping the world for money. Kyle. Yeah, so where are they? Let's get them. Hippie. Right now we're proving that we don't need corporations. We don't need money. This can become a commune where everybody just helps each other. Yeah, we'll have one guy who makes bread and one guy who looks out for other people's safety. Stan. You mean like a baker and a cop? Hippie. No. Can't you imagine a place where people live together and provide services for each other in exchange for their services? Kyle. Yeah, it's called a town. Hippie. You kids just haven't been to college yet. So the idea here is that what this utopia that the hippie is trying to describe is just a town. It's just capitalism. It's just the market providing what people need. A baker, a cop. Well, that cop doesn't have to have that initiation of force. Somebody still wants him to be protecting that town. That's the capitalism side of it. You can't stop capitalism. If you support freedom, capitalism will naturally spring up. It's just the trading of goods, specializing. And the anarcho part comes in getting rid of the monopoly on force. Get rid of the monopoly on force, all you're left with is capitalism, anarcho-capitalism. There we go. But how do we get there? So how to remove the monopoly on force? It's not something that would be easy, and it's not something that would be likely, but what I've tried to do here is just lay out a method that you can strive for in terms of getting rid of the monopoly on force, moving to an anarcho-capitalist society without upheaval. Because I know a lot of times we'll think like the society will have to collapse in order for it to be rebuilt up again. This is something to strive for without having to hope for the massive violence, massive upset and upheaval. So, you start with the federal government. The 16th Amendment, the 17th Amendment, and the Federal Reserve. You got to get rid of them. The Constitution is great because it gave us a method for changing it. These were some of the changes that were made, unfortunately, but they can also be undone. So the 16th Amendment was the income tax. It authorized the income tax. If you get rid of the 16th Amendment, you're defunding the federal government. That's a good first step, even just moving to a libertarian society. The 17th Amendment made senators elected by the people of the state instead of elected by the representatives of the state government. So fly up here, sorry. So senators used to be elected by the legislatures of each state. New Hampshire legislature would vote for the senators and send them down to Washington, D.C. And what that would do was give state governments representation in the federal government. Of course, the House, the other side of the federal government, was already, it represents the people because of the districts. So that's popular vote, but the 17th Amendment made senators elected by popular vote as well. States have no representation in the federal government. So that's a way to restore states' rights, and just like the competition in the market produces better businesses, competition among the states produces better states. And finally, get rid of the Federal Reserve because they hold a monopoly on the money that we use, and really by printing money, what they do is they cause inflation. If you have a savings account, it's not going to be worth as much in 10 years because of the inflation. They keep printing the money. There's no more goods to be bought with the money. The goods are gonna cost more. So those are the first three steps. Then, with this power to amend the Constitution, you just make an amendment that says the government will be ended on this date. And you would want to do this piece by piece. So you would want to look down the road and say, we're going to end the Department of Education in 2016. That gives the free market time to fulfill the needs that the Department of Education fulfilled before. Now, there's already private schools. This isn't a problem. It would be quite easy for that to be absorbed. But then you move down the line. You get rid of the EPA. You do this one by one. And different organizations are going to spring up that are like the EPA in order to keep the environment clean, but they won't have the power of force behind them. They'll have to do things mutually beneficially. They can't force somebody to clean up their land. It has to be public pressure, advocacy groups, and things like that. Finally, you're going to get rid of the entire federal government and let the states take care of all of the processes that we still think are necessary. But an essential part in this is every piece of the government that you get rid of, that tax money needs to be rebated back to the people. Not only the tax money, but it needs to be abolished for the next year. You're never going to have to pay those taxes again. And then the federal buildings, the federal equipment, which has all been bought with tax dollars stolen from the people, needs to be auctioned off and sold back to the people. And that money needs to be rebated back into the population. What that will do is put the wealth that has been taken from us back into our hands, but there's still going to be a market for those buildings. Somebody can use those buildings, somebody can use that equipment, but it's not going to be by force. The other thing is, if one of these organizations that's part of the government that we shut down wants to continue existing, that's fine. But they're going to have to come up with their own funding. So let's say the FBI thinks that they still have a legitimate thing to sell to people, that people want that protection. That's fine, but the FBI is going to have to come up with their own funding to buy back their equipment and to buy back their weapons and to buy back their buildings. If they can't, then it's going to be auctioned off like everything else. But since it's a free society, there's nobody to stop them from forming their own organization and trying to sell their expertise instead of forcing it on us. Then the competition among the states is going to really be where this comes in. Do you guys know right now which states are gaining population and which states are losing it? Texas is gaining, California's losing, New Hampshire, who is it? Connecticut's losing. I hear New Hampshire has 20,000 people moving to it at some point. So the point is, there's actually a book out that's called How Money Walks. And it studied where wealth was moving between the states. From 1995 to 2010, the 9 states with no income tax gained $146 billion in gross domestic product from the people that live there and earn money there. And the 9 states with the highest income tax lost $107 billion of GDP. Right there, that pretty much says it all. People are moving to states with lower taxes, with less government, less intrusion, less restriction, fewer regulations. Where are you going to want to start a business? My sister wants to start a business. We live in Massachusetts. She's not going to start it in Massachusetts. She's going to move to maybe New Hampshire, maybe Georgia, but you're not going to start a business in a place that restricts you like that. So naturally, the better states are already winning out. The states with fewer regulations, lower taxes, the money is going from California to New Hampshire, and that's what would happen when these states are competing after the federal government is gone. And then what you would have to do is go through each of those states and go through the same process you went with the federal government. Set a date for ending particular programs, give the market the proper time to spring up with businesses that'll take the places of the necessary government functions. But the way it is right now, I don't know if you can see this picture. Down here, there's a guy raking leaves or picking up leaves. I live in a town where they provide leaf pickup. They drive around once or twice a year and they will scoop up all the leaves at the side of the road. I pay for that through my taxes. I don't have the choice to pay for that through my taxes. They decided that I'm going to have leaf pickup and they're going to take my money to do it. Some people don't have trees. Some people don't bother raking the leaves to the side of the road. Some people can rake them into their woods. The point is, why is my money being taken and they're giving me a service that I could just go buy on my own? There's landscapers. Landscapers have these trucks. This doesn't need to be a government function, and I bet it would cost less, too, if it wasn't a government function. So that's just a small example, but the point is that the market can easily absorb everything that is necessary that the government does. All right. How's it going? Are you guys asleep? That's pretty much the presentation I had, but as you know from the billing of it, this was meant to be mostly a discussion. I didn't want to sit here and talk for an hour. I wanted to get everybody's thoughts and ideas. So let's talk about this more. Can we get some questions? Or there's actually a microphone up here if anybody wants to come up here and you want to talk into the microphone?
Just have a comment. I put up a site just 3 weeks ago, ancapfaq.com. It's just common questions about how an ANCAP society would function.
Yep.
And basically I want it to grow by readers submitting their questions, and over time I'd like to get several hundred questions answered. So just wanted to plug that.
Awesome. That's great. And up on my blog, blog.vigilantvote.com, there's a few different there's a bunch of different posts on this. Actually, I'm at campsite 51 and 55 up there. I'm going to be all alone. My family's not joining me till Wednesday. If you want to stop by, you can sign up to get emails from my blog every time there's a new post. I have a few samples with me that you can read, or we can just talk about anarcho-capitalism.
I noticed a fundamental flaw in your argument. There is a single agency I can actually think of that actually is that basically it would be against a corporation's interest to do no matter how much demand there is. And that's basically the Food and Drug Administration. Right now, they don't want people knowing what's in their food, and they're obviously going to do everything they can to keep these people out. Without the application of force, there is no way for the people to look and see what these people are doing without.
Well, so the market forces would take care of this, because right now what you have is the FDA serving for a blocker for bad companies that don't want people to know what's in their food. Now, you don't need force in order to get in there and do the inspecting. The market forces can take care of that if an agency or just a business springs up and says, my readers want to view your factory. They want to know what's in your food, and we want samples to take apart. If they say no, well, that's the market. We don't have to shop there. And being a smart consumer, it goes back to being a vigilant voter. The society that we have right now, we have to be perfect voters in order to keep it good. In an anarcho-capitalist society, we'd have to be good buyers. We'd have to purchase from the right places in order to make that happen. But I think that the market forces would take care of that better than the FDA could.
I see what you're saying, but I still think the flaw's there. But
thank you. I appreciate the feedback.
It's really the biggest loophole to me. That's what the loophole.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Hi, my name is James Yeager, and I produced a film called Fiat Empire with Ron Paul a number of years ago on the Federal Reserve System. So I work in the movie industry. And in the movie industry, we use arbiters all the time. All of our contracts basically say that we can submit this to a court of arbiters and then bypass the government judiciary system. So my question basically is this. Given the workability of arbitration, let's see an anarcho-capitalist society, let's say one of your neighbors murdered someone. How would you compel the person who was believed to have murdered someone into a court of jurisdiction or arbitration without using force?
Well, you would be using force. You wouldn't be initiating force. If somebody initiates force against you, responding to that force is not the same as initiating it.
Yeah, but so, who would be initiating the force?
You said he murdered.
Well, who would be initiating the force, and what would motivate an arbiter court or some police force to go after someone that murdered someone?
So the motivation would be that, like most of us, or a lot of people have insurance, you would buy...
Well, to put it bluntly, who would pay for it?
Let's say
someone's killed, and I don't even know the person.
Yeah.
What motivates me to pay for that?
Well, you won't have to pay for it. They either had insurance that would cover that in the first place, so it's insurance through a security company because they want that crime deterrent. So you have a company that is going to go after whoever murders you. They're going to do the investigatory work just like the police would do now, and they're going to go and get that person. They're not going to be initiating force because that's a murderer. So they'll be brought to justice, but it'll be through a private company that does it, just like it is now, except that it would either be paid for through the insurance that you buy in the first place, or it would be paid for by the family, essentially employing a bounty hunter.
So you're saying that everybody would have insurance in case someone was murdered?
Yes.
It would be murder insurance?
Essentially, it would be a security company.
And what if people decided they didn't want to buy that?
Well, then they'd be at risk of being murdered without justice.
Wait, but it's not the person that's murdered that wants the justice.
Sorry?
It's not the person that's murdered that gives a damn about the justice.
Well, you're right.
Why would the victims... Someone in my neighborhood was killed.
Yes.
I don't know the person. I'm sorry they were killed.
Yeah.
But what's going to motivate me to bring them to court or to even pay for insurance?
Well, but you wouldn't have anything to do with it. If you wanted that person to be caught, then you might want to pay for it.
So it would be the family and friends of the victim.
In reality, they would probably have already purchased security so that their security company would be going after whoever murdered them. Now, they would have the means to do this because half of their wealth that they create each year wouldn't already be taken by the government. So they have, since you're not being taxed, you have this extra money, and part of what you're going to spend that on is security. You're going to buy that from an agency that offers you that service, and their thing is, we will go after a murderer, we will go after people that have committed a property crime on you, and we'll bring them to justice because you're paying us to do that. That's the product.
Thank you. I don't want to monopolize. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a suggestion and a question.
Yes.
Suggestion with terminology. You were contrasting anarcho-capitalism with libertarianism.
Yes.
I try to view sort of the political spectrum as libertarian on one end and authoritarian on the other, and maybe minarchism is more what you meant for libertarianism, so that we can all be under the same big tent.
Yes, yeah, I wasn't trying to alienate anybody. You're right. I should have used probably better terminology, but.
And the question is, so I like I think you picked out the amendments and the institution that are really the core of the empire legally, and so those are great targets. But it seems like the Constitution has not been evolving by amendment for really like 100 years.
Yeah.
So if you have any thoughts on that, and also if you were to try to stir up the will to get something passed, what do you think about like a right of secession amendment that clearly states that states could leave as opposed to these measures?
And of course, coming into forming, you got to remember that the states formed the federal government, so it was kind of taken as a given that they didn't have to participate in it if they didn't want to. Obviously, the Civil War, not so much related to slavery, but related to states' rights in terms of seceding, served a blow to that. But so sorry, to get back to the question about the Constitution hasn't been amended in over 100 years.
Well, no, it's been amended, but it's not the usual path. Nothing substantial.
Oh, I'm sorry. Of the Constitution?
There's been alcohol and but I mean,
sorry. I'm sorry.
Nothing really.
Yeah, you're right. I misspoke. Sorry.
I would say nothing that's changed the real constitutional order in 100 years since the 16th, 17th Amendments. That was where I was getting.
Yeah. So I think that, like I said, repealing those would be a great place to start. Maybe I'm getting confused about what you're asking.
The question is, like, if you were going to try to get all the voters in the states together, would it be more effective to just try to pass something that said states can leave rather than repealing the federal government piece by piece?
Yeah, I suppose that would be pretty effective. Just based on the track record, the federal government would just probably not allow that. But I guess if it was amendment, technically they would have to allow it. So that would be a proper method too. And the point of this, it's not like this is not my doctoral thesis or anything. It's just an idea, something to get the ball moving in that general direction, so that there's a way to think about anarcho-capitalism as more than just like a fantasy. Thanks.
I mean, whatever specific path you take, repealing certain amendments, get others passed, getting people elected or whatever, the real challenge is changing the culture. Because unless people really start caring more about freedom and are willing to do what's necessary to make the change, no path is going to work. So the question is how to go about doing that. And there's a lot of ideas. And I mean, the Free State Project, one thing might be if we're successful in New Hampshire, it might serve as an example. But that, what it comes down to, ignoring the details, is how do you change the culture so that people don't believe they need the government and really care about personal liberty?
Yeah, and that is the tough part. I think that it goes back to a philosophical change that needs to happen. I think that people need to learn about their natural rights and learn that you have the right to protect yourself. That's not something that the government grants to you. And we're so far gone since we have that feeling that we have to go to the government, and get permission to carry a gun to protect myself. It's like if there wasn't this force telling you what you can and can't do, you just would protect yourself. It's not something that you have to ask for. So I think going back to the natural rights philosophy and teaching people about that would be a good place to start. Obviously, that's the tough part.
On the topic of natural law and personal liberty, earlier on in the presentation, you suggested that extending states' rights could lead to a freer society. Every time I hear discussion promoting states' rights, I always think to myself, as a fundamental issue, what that might mean for the people's rights, considering the states and the United States are supposed to have an interest in protecting people's liberty.
Yeah.
What do you suppose expanding states' rights would do to protect the people's?
So there's always the chance for a state to take advantage and oppress its people, and the federal government is supposed to protect those rights. Obviously, it's not doing a very good job. I would say that what would keep the states honest is the competition among the states. I live in Massachusetts, and it's easy for me to move to New Hampshire. It's not as easy for me to move to Switzerland, say. So that competition, right now, we see where that's going. The GDP of these states, of the more restrictive, bigger government states, is shrinking as people move out, and people are moving into the better run states, the more libertarian style. So based on that going on right now, I have to believe that as the states continue to compete, and if they were to follow that model and shrink their government and abolish laws, abolish departments, and be rebating that money, I would have to say that I think that would win out, and that the population would continue to move to those states.
So in other words, the fluctuation of the GDP could be kind of some kind of behavioral therapy, so to speak, onto the states, based on whether they act benevolently or malevolently.
If they want the money, they're going to have
people
to act appropriately. Exactly.
Right.
So the market, again, will be the deciding factor. Yeah.
Yeah. Right, thank you.
Thanks.
Hi. My question kind of falls into the environmental category,
Yep.
but I was going to ask about national parks, because those are currently a government thing. So I wanted to know, like, how would that be managed? Like, would it also fall into like the market taking care of it, or?
It would have to fall into the market taking care of it, and this is one of those areas where I could see personal benefit taking a second place to the philosophy. I use the national parks, I use the state parks, but what's that is really doing is forcing other people to pay for my experiences. Federal or state money is being used for those parks, and I'm getting way more benefit than a lot of people, because a lot of people never even step foot in those parks. Essentially, they would have to be sold off. Now, there very well may be a market, though, to keep those preserved in that way, so that people can still use them. It would just be something that you have to pay for. You know, you might have to pay $20. It might be even more, when you're going to those parks in order to use them. Did that answer the question?
A little bit, yeah.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
There are actually some sort of private things, maybe Conservancy is an issue for them, and others where people donate to the friends because they care about it, and they buy land to keep it undeveloped and available.
Yeah, and you gotta. And it wouldn't actually, I think about it right now, it's like, oh, if you had 200 acres, well, what are the property taxes going to be? But you got to remember that since there wouldn't be property taxes, there wouldn't really be any cost to holding on to that land. It would just be about managing it.
So would it fall into, because I've been told that with the liberty and the no taxes and the ownership of property, that people would generally take a lot better care of their land because they own it and they're responsible for it, instead of just thinking that someone else would take care of it.
I would agree with that as well. I think that when you have ownership of those things, that you are more likely to do that. And sort of the same thing in terms of when it comes to charities and things like that. Right now, if we assume that our taxes are taking care of the poor, we're assuming wrong. Because if you think about it, I think it's about $62,000 a year per household in poverty, which the government spends, and that should tell you that money's not being spent appropriately, because the poverty line is somewhere below half of that. The median income is 52 grand or something like that. So if that money was just literally being handed to the households in poverty, poverty would be eradicated. So I gotta believe that the money would be put in better places to help with charity and to help with environmental causes as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, just accepting the idea that through some sort of amendment process, and I'm going to give you that, we can effectuate change. And accepting, again, that the amendment that's passed is going to be interpreted by the very people we're seeking to restrain in the manner in which we would like them to interpret it. Accepting all that, my proposal to you would be is that instead of identifying particular agencies or programs, which, yeah, will abolish the FBI, and the federal government will abolish it tomorrow, and then create a state security service. What you would need to do, if we were to assume that this could work, is a process by which you would actually limit the powers of the government specifically, such as there are no law enforcement powers, no police powers in the federal government. Thereby, any type of law enforcement agency, including the FBI, would be considered unconstitutional. Good luck enforcing that.
I agree, yeah.
Okay, the second thing is the earlier comment regarding the idea of what do you do with a murderer? There's ample literature out there right now talking about libertarian and non-statist solutions to such things as murder.
Yeah.
In fact, a year or two ago, I did a presentation, a three-part presentation, talking about how we can use common law principles and common law institutions which have very little foundation in the state to address things just like that. So it's very brave of you to come up here in front of all these libertarians and start pitching anarcho-capitalism in your form. And so, you know, if you didn't come here thinking there would be questions, good luck.
No, I wanted there to be questions. And I was nervous because, like I said, I'm not an authority on this. I really just wanted to get the conversation going. But
last but not least is that your real focus, and I think it's a pickup from an earlier question, what's going to keep the states from abusing our individual liberties as opposed to the federal government? Well, the answer, I think, is that the closer the government is to the people, the more responsive they become to the needs of the people. Therefore, your real answer isn't to empower the states, but to empower the individual and the communities, as opposed to the federal government and the states.
Yeah.
So our efforts should probably be more toward the enforcement of the 10th and the 9th Amendment than it is to create a whole series of new amendments.
That's a good point.
Both amendments essentially raise those issues and basically say
right.
those powers not enunciated in the federal Constitution are reserved to the states and the people.
Exactly, and that's a good point. I probably should have mentioned the 10th Amendment, which of course says that anything not specifically delegated to the federal government should be left to the states or to the people, which would pretty much abolish a lot of the federal government the way it is right now anyway. And the Ninth Amendment saying that not only the rights enumerated, you have other rights as well, and that shouldn't be used to disparage the other rights. Right, yeah. So those, I think those are very important as well. And you're probably right that it was more like a stepping stone to get the states, you know, the way it's been built up to the central control, take it down each notch. Do you think that would be appropriate to, you know, to...
Oh, I have no problem with the incrementalist approach. I mean, again, what we're basically doing is teaching elementary school students advanced geometry in the idea that most people assume that their liberties are defined by what they can watch on television,
right,
as opposed to really looking at it as having real control over their lives, their wealth, and their families. And many people, in my experience, have essentially had a huge slap in the face when they run up against government and realize, yeah, it is legal. It may not be right, it may not be just, but it is legal.
Yep.
So the idea of moving backwards toward the individual and toward the community is always the positive step in this.
Yep,
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, in answering the 30 or so questions that I've started with for ANCAPFAQ.com, I noticed a common theme that you can give small government people or raving statists or whatever when they ask you how will this or that be averted, be it pollution or child abuse, how will that be solved in the absence of a centralized authority? I think the first thing that you should always point out before getting into the nitty-gritty nuts and bolts response is to point to empirical evidence of this or that problem being directly caused by or exacerbated by the state. For instance, pollution, So the filthiest countries in the world have always been, in the last half century, 3/4 of a century, have been communist countries, which are the epitome of big government. Child abuse, there's a lot of empirical evidence that the warfare state contributes to that, because vets get PTSD and then they abuse their kids.
Yeah.
And crime in general, that all these social ills are directly or indirectly caused by the state. So crime will go down. That doesn't mean you shouldn't get into the nitty-gritty of how you deal with the little bit of crime that remains. But you say first and foremost, we have every reason to believe that it will go way down. And the few times that it does happen, well, this is how we take care of it.
And that's an important point.
To put it in proper order.
That's a great point too, that in this society there wouldn't be as much crime, there wouldn't be as much need for charity, there would already be that extra wealth in the society. A lot of the problems are caused by government, and that's a great point.
So you were talking about the 10th Amendment and states' rights as kind of producing more individual liberty. What about the concept of liberty is fundamentally deriving from smaller governments? So I know Rothbard talked about, well, if New York, or if the US and Canada can be different countries without being an anarchy, then why can't New York be a different state? Why can't New York City be a different sovereign territory? Why can't each block or each property owner be a different sovereign territory? And that kind of being the definition, and then in the sense of any incrementalist approach, also the approach to politics of, judging everything by, well, does it devolve power to a lesser level, or does it keep it, imperialized?
Yeah, so you're saying that pretty much would the private property be, each individual's private property would be a sovereign? Yeah, and that's the point, that people have rights in and of themselves. To monopolize that force on your property is quite different than monopolizing that force on somebody else's property. Thank you.
Now that the lines, could I just put a coda on our earlier discussion?
Oh, yeah.
About, I brought up the idea of arbitration. Somebody kills someone, whose benefit will be to bring them to a court of law? Well, in the light of being consistent, since I think we're all agree that we don't like the initiation of force, why not totally get rid of the punishment system? In other words, there is no punishment. We go from a eye for eye society to a turn the other cheek. Now, there's examples in Africa where, let's say, a member of the tribe goes out and kills someone or does something heinous. Well, they bring them in and they put them in the middle of a circle, and they all kind of just pray or positive postulate. The whole tribe asks the question, what went so horribly wrong in this individual's life that they ended up having to take another person's life? Then instead of punishing them, which does nothing to rehabilitate the individual or society, what if we just forget about the whole concept of punishment in an anarcho-capitalistic society, and get rid of the whole, if we don't need government, why do we need punishment?
And I think that goes back to what you were saying. Do you want to?
First of all, I would say there wouldn't be punishment per se, but there would be sanctions of some sort. Definitely there'd be people ostracizing the offender. Secondly, the concept of making the victim whole, I think, is philosophically sound, and some sort of, you could call it forced labor or a restitution, whereby the person is confined and they can, there's a certain percentage of their work for pay that's allotted to keeping the electricity on in their dormitory, whatever, and then for the food, then they can buy whatever level of quality food within their budget, and then the 3/4 or half or 2/3, whatever, goes to the victim or the victim's estate in the case of homicide. And so that's not punishment per se. It's not a vindictive, revenge-based thing, but it is making the victim whole, and there is a moral obligation on the perpetrator.
Okay, well, I disagree with that. I think that is the punishment system, just guised in sugar coating. You say, oh, well, let's make society whole. Well, the best way you can make society whole is to rehabilitate that one particular individual, not pay back money to somebody. Fuck the money, fuck the restitution. Somebody in the tribe went out and killed somebody. Why did they do that? Well, it's because your fault, at least 51%. We, as a society, are at least half responsible. Why do we deserve to have restitution if we created that individual that went out and killed someone?
Right, and I think that...
So we're talking about total and pure rehabilitation. If you look at an exponential rollout of something like this, you end up with a much more utopian civilization in 100 or 200 or 300 years than you do by punishing people or getting retribution in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, the only problem I could see with that is if you can't 100% rehabilitate somebody, if they're going to reoffend.
Well, that comes down to your view of human nature. Do you believe human nature is basically good or bad?
Well, it would just take 1 out of a million people to...
Can people be rehabilitated? In these tribes that take the individual and they put him in the center and they pray for him and they ask, seek, why did you do this? There's pure rehabilitation.
Yeah.
And there are examples of that in other things around the country. In other words, I take the view that mankind is basically good, not sinful.
Yeah.
Like certain religions brainwash us into accepting as memes.
Yep.
We're not bad. We're basically good. We only seek to survive.
I take that same view. It just seems that there's always the opportunity with 7 billion people on Earth that you could have 99.99% of the humanity being good.
Well, now you're talking about the mentally ill, possibly. And if they're structurally damaged, what do? You punish them?
Well, it's not about punishment. Sometimes it's about removing.
My dad was a psychiatrist. I grew up on Norristown State Hospital. I've seen the mentally ill.
Yeah.
And some of them are damaged. But even today, we're getting to the point where we can genetically engineer drugs so we can help them too.
Yeah, I got it. So one of the foundational premises of anarcho-capitalism is respect for private property. And if there's not a system of restitution in place to make victims whole for damaged property or loss of life, loss of limb, what have you, it's not really anarcho-capitalism. So outright pure forgiveness for everything, while that might sound warm and fuzzy, I don't think that can jive perfectly with anarcho-capitalism because it's a voluntary society and some people will voluntarily forgive, some people will choose not to, or they'll choose to forgive, but they still want their stuff replaced or what have you. You're never going to get 100% of people that will simply forgive outright.
And that's why the market forces should really take care of
that. So that's the bottom line.
My goal is not to make this philosophy jive with anarcho-capitalism. I don't care about the names or the preconceived concepts. I'm searching for something that is long time more workable for human civilization, and I just simply maintain that the punishment system keeps us into the mud, and restitution is another form of punishment.
Well, maybe if the punishment system is used improperly. I mean, I find it interesting how this discussion has gone into human nature and the like. I mean, that's actually pretty productive, but to eliminate punishment entirely seems psychologically unrealistic, especially if you are trying to treat the mentally unstable. And your methods involve behavioral psychology, where it is far too likely that punishment, be it positive or negative, would be too likely necessary to be eliminated from any behavioral program.
Sometimes it comes down to working with what you have.
Right. However, the points regarding the African tribe who looked into the causes of a person's behavior should give us some insight as to how to approach those matters rather than just blindly dish out punishment based on the facts, but rather trying to figure out the psychological circumstances that led a person to act a certain way.
Yeah, I think there could be a long discussion about how to properly rehabilitate people.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on that field.
Yeah, this has quickly gone from
I think that
like political philosophy and whatnot to psychology, and it's psychology that is pretty much the sole reason why I'm up here again.
Okay, that's great. Let's keep the discussion going.
I'd just like to point out that some of the worst and most psychotic people aren't in the institutions. they're running the government.
That's a good point. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd like to say that the most functioning, evil, psychotic, dark people, you can rehabilitate them all you want. They'll just say, "Oh, I'm so sorry." They'll go through the process. They'll be fine with it. We'll say it's all said and done. They go out and do it again, and they do the same thing over and over and over if there's no permanent solution to that. That's just my view on that.
Yeah,
That could be totally wrong.
And I think part of the discussion surrounded changing the way this system is so that you don't end up with people like that in the first place. But again, I'm not an expert on psychology. I tend to agree that you need to have something in place in order to make sure those people don't reoffend. I would agree with that.
I just wanted to comment on what he said. Everyone here has seen the Star Trek, right? You know those episodes where there's the Borg? And
Not familiar.
The Borg, right? And they beam into the ship, and the Borg just stand there continuing to work as if they're not even there. Well, our goal as a civilization should be to become so prosperous and successful that, you know, if things like a few towers come down in a city somewhere, it's like the Borg. It doesn't even bother us. We don't reconfigure the whole gross national debt to get, you know, we just are totally impervious to negative things that happen, and we accept the idea that 0.001% of the population is psycho, and we got rid of the government, so we've gotten rid of, 99% of the psychos. So my point is that a punishment civilization keeps you a punishment civilization. And the whole concept of retribution, eye for eye technology is what we're operating. Eye for eye crap has to go.
I agree
and
with
we got to
you.
become like a benevolent Borg.
And I agree. I think that the market would have solutions for the way there. That is the best goal to have. We should have the goal of getting to that point eventually. I'm not willing, I guess, to have my family members murdered along the way, because we're obviously not there yet. So I think if you want to pare down the eye for an eye system, I think that the market
But let
forces...
me ask you this. Let's say one of your family members was murdered. Would you rather see that person electrocuted or punished, or 100% rehabilitated?
Well,
If it
those
can
aren't
happen,
those aren't
okay?
really the only options.
No, I'm just
though.
saying, which would you rather see happen? Punished?
Would I rather? Yes, I'd rather see 100% rehabilitation.
Okay, would most people feel that way?
First,
or would you rather punish the guy? Who wants to punish him? Raise your hand.
I would suggest taking this offline because people need to set up for the next
Oh,
talk.
sorry. All right.
Oh wait, he wanted to say one other
What,
thing.
what time is it? Do you have the?
I think it was like 3:56. Yeah, so I totally like the main reason why I like this guy's comment about the psychos outside of the insane asylums and whatnot, or going out and doing certain behaviors even after having some treatment, it gives me cause to think that such people's treatments have been incomplete, because the behavior he suggested, or he referenced to, that is resuming the behavior that was to be curbed, is what is known as an extinction burst. When you have an extinction burst in a patient, it means the treatment is not complete.
That's good. That's a good piece of it. And I guess we're going to end it there unless we had any more comments to wrap up. Did you have? All right. Thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate it. And like I said, feel free to stop by my site if you want to discuss this more, or log on blog.vigilantvote.com, and we can continue the discussion there as well. Thanks.